What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Right or Wrong NFL podcast. Week 2 is officially over. Thursday night to Monday Night Football, all 32 teams have played their second game of the NFL season, and today we're going to recap Week 2. We're going to go over scores from around the league, stat lines, games of the week, standout players, and so much more. We have so much to get into today and so much breaking news to cover. So with that being said, with that being the case, let's get right on and taking a look and starting off with scores around the league. Now, this is not particularly in an order based off when they played. These are just the games that we are not going to go super in-depth about, but of course I wanted to mention these teams because if it's an NFL Week 2 recap, we can't recap the week without talking about everybody. So, starting off, the Patriots and the Steelers clashed in Foxborough, and the Patriots came out on top by a score of 17-14. The Panthers were defeated by the Giants by a score of 19-16, while the Giants improved to 2-0, and the Panthers fall to 0-2. The Jets upset the Cleveland Browns by a score of 31-30 with Joe Flacco at quarterback. Both teams now sitting at 1-1 respectively. The Jacksonville Jaguars had a very strong showing, having the lone shutout of the week as they were able to defeat the Colts by a score of 24-0, forcing 3 picks on Matt Ryan and having a very good defensive showing. The Baltimore Ravens and the Miami Dolphins had maybe the game of the week in a 42-38 contest that saw Miami have a fourth quarter comeback in a major way. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense dominated in New Orleans, coming away with a 20-10 victory for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Lions had a very good game versus the Washington Commanders and actually looked like a pretty good football team for once in a very long time. The San Francisco 49ers bounced back after an upset loss to the Chicago Bears, and they were able to defeat the Seattle Seahawks by a score of 27-7. The Falcons and the Rams faced off in a very close game, a game that was probably closer than it should have been. The Rams were able to escape with a 31-27 victory. The Cardinals and the Raiders had their lone overtime game of the week as the Cardinals prevailed in OT by a score of 29-23. The Texans and the Broncos in a very close defensive matchup saw the Broncos come out on top in a 16-9 game. The Cowboys upset the Cincinnati Bengals while the Bengals fall to 0-2. The Cowboys rebound to 1-1. The Cowboys winning this game 20-17. The Green Bay Packers on Sunday Night Football were able to outlast the Chicago Bears in a 27-10 contest. The Bills absolutely embarrassed the Titans on Monday Night Football by a score of 41-7, while the Philadelphia Eagles took care of business at home on Monday Night Football versus the Minnesota Vikings, walking out of that contest as very clear victors in a 24-7 contest. Now, getting on to games of the week, we're going to start out on Thursday night as Kansas City clashed with Los Angeles in a very big-time rivalry game with two of the AFC's top quarterbacks, two of the AFC's top favorited teams to win the conference outright, clashed early in a division battle and in a potential playoff battle as well. It saw Justin Herbert clash with Patrick Mahomes. It saw two of the greatest quarterbacks in the NFL face off, and this game did not disappoint. It came down to a very, very close ending as the Kansas City Chiefs were able to escape with the victory. Now, this game saw Justin Herbert pass for 334 yards and 3 touchdowns to just 1 interception, while Patrick Mahomes, despite throwing many passes that could have been intercepted, ended the game with 235 passing yards, 2 touchdowns to 0 turnovers. There was a ton of major throws. There was some of the most impressive throws you're ever going to see on both sides. The passing touchdown from Patrick Mahomes was incredible, and then the play from Justin Herbert to get his team back in the game, injured, broken ribs, could barely run on the play before Justin Herbert sits in the pocket, delivers a perfect ball down the seam to Gerald Everett to get the Chargers into field goal range and to get the Chargers back into scoring range. Now, unfortunately, that drive might not have ended the way that a lot of fans were hoping, But, I mean, there was some absolutely phenomenal throws from both sides, and this game was definitely a clash of titans. Now, neither team ran the ball particularly well, as the Los Angeles Chargers had just 24 attempts as a team for 75 yards, and Kansas City had 18 carries as a team for just 93 total rushing yards as a team. Mike Williams was the lone standout at these skill positions, right? Neither running back really did anything. Neither wide receiver on the Kansas City Chiefs really had a major breakout day, but Mike Williams definitely did, having 8 receptions for 113 yards and a touchdown on the day. He and Justin Herbert have a very clear special connection, and in the absence of Keenan Allen, Mike Williams stepped up in a huge way and proved that he can be the wide receiver 1 if he is needed to do so. Now, in this game, the Chargers jumped out to a very early lead with a field goal in the first quarter, and then the two teams swapped touchdowns in the second. The Chargers went into halftime up 10-7 on the Kansas City Chiefs, and coming out of halftime, both teams traded touchdowns again, going into the fourth quarter with a game of 17-14. Now, the fourth quarter would be the dagger for the Los Angeles Chargers, as despite missing multiple opportunities for major takeaways by Patrick Mahomes, the Kansas City Chiefs were able to mount a major comeback. They were able to get ahead in this game, and of course, this game came down to the red zone pick 6 by the 7th round rookie. One of the players that the Chiefs drafted this year in the secondary with their 7th round pick, their last pick in the NFL draft, got his opportunity, found himself in the game in a situation to make a major play down in the red zone to prevent a touchdown. Not only did he prevent the touchdown, he ended up scoring 6 for Kansas City, and that would end up being the play that changed the game. Now, by no means was this game out of control for either team. Both teams were in this game every step of the way, and I would even argue that the Los Angeles Chargers were the better football team in this contest, right? They had more yards, they had more first downs. They statistically outperformed Kansas City in every offensive metric, and if the Chargers were able to capitalize off of some of the mistakes and some of the poor throws by Patrick Mahomes, they very easily could have walked away with 2 to 3 interceptions and probably had 4 or 5 opportunities to truly force a turnover, but unfortunately, they were unable to capitalize. The first interception early in the first half was called back due to defensive pass interference. There was one by Asante Samuel Jr. that was dropped. There were one by Derwin James that was considered pass interference that did not count. There were a lot of different interceptions and multiple takeaways taken away from the Los Angeles Chargers because of either penalties or just failure to capitalize on opportunity. Now, Kansas City, of course, as I mentioned, does walk out of this game as the victor. They walk out on top of the AFC West and currently sit as tied for the number 1 seed in the AFC. We're going to see another matchup between these two AFC juggernauts later in the season, and honestly, this game can go either way next time. Just like this time, it's going to be a major clash. It's going to be a huge matchup, and we're going to see one of the best games in the NFL when these two teams meet again. Now, another game that was top of the list this week was, of course, the shootout in Miami between the Baltimore Ravens and the Miami Dolphins, in a game that saw over 1,000 offensive yards, 80 total points, and 50 first downs. This game was for those of you that love offensive football. The Ravens jumped out to a large lead early as Devin Duvernay returned the opening kickoff 103 yards for a kick return touchdown, and the Ravens in turn would then score 3 more touchdowns in the second quarter as Lamar Jackson adds 3 more passing touchdowns to his stat line this season. But the Miami Dolphins would answer back with 1 score to their own with a big-time touchdown from Tua Tagovailoa to Jalen Waddle early in the second quarter. The Ravens were the better football team in the first half. They scored 4 touchdowns to Miami's 1. They were out to a 28-7 lead, and this game looked like an early blowout for the Baltimore Ravens. And when they opened the third quarter, the Ravens opened up with a score again as Lamar Jackson had a 79-yard rushing touchdown to open the third quarter, and in turn setting the NFL record for most 100-yard rushing games by a quarterback in a career in just Lamar Jackson's 4th year as a pro. But after that, Miami would then score a touchdown, and the fourth quarter would get underway and start to get out of hand. The fourth quarter started with River Craycraft having a 2-yard receiving touchdown from Tua Tagovailoa to kind of start the momentum in favor of the Miami Dolphins, and they did not look back. On the next drive, Tyreek Hill and Tua Tagovailoa connected for a 48-yard touchdown, which saw them bring the lead closer and closer and closer. The drive after that, Tyreek Hill was connected with again for a 60-yard touchdown and a huge play over the top to tie the game back up for the Miami Dolphins. Justin Tucker, in turn, would look to save the game with a 51-yard field goal, which he would hit and help the Ravens take a 38-35 lead with just 2 minutes and 18 seconds left. And then the Dolphins went back to work. Jalen Waddle walked into the end zone with a 7-yard touchdown to take the lead in this game with just 16 seconds remaining. This game was incredible. This game was an offensive shootout, top to bottom. Tua Tagovailoa had 461 passing yards, 6 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Those 2 interceptions coming from free agent signee Marcus Williams of the Baltimore Ravens defense. He is having a very solid start to his season, but it wasn't enough to down the Dolphins. Tua had 6 passing touchdowns in this game, very nearly hitting an NFL record and having career highs in yards and touchdowns. Lamar Jackson had 437 total scrimmage yards, both rushing and passing today on Sunday, with 4 total touchdowns to 0 turnovers. Lamar Jackson led the game in rushing yards with a massive run of 79 yards for the touchdown, but had 9 carries on the day for 119 yards and the singular touchdown. As I mentioned, Marcus Williams, the free agent signee, came away with both of the Baltimore Ravens interceptions. He had a very good day defensively, but he was one of the few Baltimore Ravens that are not going to have their heads down after this. He's one of the few Baltimore Ravens holding his head high after this loss. He, in particular, played a very good defensive game, but unfortunately for him and the Ravens organization, the rest of the defense couldn't quite play up to that level. And then the last team we're going to talk about, the last game we're going to highlight today, is the Cardinals versus the Raiders. The overtime duel between Kyler Murray and Derek Carr. 2 0-1 teams coming into this game, both teams with playoff aspirations in a must-win football game. And despite the Raiders having the very clear advantage in the first half of this game, the Arizona Cardinals rallied in the second half. They came back and were able to take a huge lead, tie the game up as time expired in the fourth quarter, and then go out and make a huge defensive play to win the game in overtime. Now, the Raiders went into halftime with a 20-0 lead after Devontae Adams would score his first touchdown as a Raider in the first quarter, and Darren Waller would score his first touchdown of the 2022 season in the second quarter. A field goal or two hit by the Raider kicker would put the Raiders up by 20 going into half, but that's when Kyler Murray and the Cardinals offense started to come alive, and that is when Kyler Murray earned his big contract extension. Kyler Murray would open up the third quarter with a short touchdown pass to Greg Dortch, the wide receiver, and would help start to mount that comeback. But the fourth quarter is where things really started to get underway, as the Cardinals would score 16 unanswered points in the fourth quarter and as the Arizona Cardinals would score 16 unanswered points in the fourth quarter, seeing the Cardinals score multiple 2-point conversions and scoring the game-tying touchdown and 2-point conversion as time expired on the clock. There were zeros on the clock for that final 2-point conversion, and Kyler Murray connects with A.J. Green in the back of the end zone to tie things up 23-23. Sending the game to overtime. Now, the Raiders would get this ball to start overtime, and after a few plays on offense, Byron Murphy would make the biggest play of the day as he is able to scoop and score a 59-yard fumble return touchdown, in turn putting the game out of reach for the Arizona Cardinals and ending the game right then and there. Now, there was no major statistical standout in this game. There was no MVP caliber performance. There was no, Justin Herbert. There was no Tyreek Hill with 190 yards, but there were some solid performers. Derek Carr led the Raiders with 252 passing yards to 3 touchdowns with 0 turnovers, while Kyler Murray led the Arizona Cardinals with 277 passing yards, 1 touchdown to 1 interception. The Cardinals' rushing attack had 28 attempts for 143 yards and a singular touchdown, and despite the individual touchdown and success early in the first quarter by Davante Adams, he did struggle with just 2 receptions for 12 yards on 7 targets for the day. The Raiders have now fallen to 0-2, and last year there were, I believe, 7 teams to start the season 0-2, and none of them made the playoff. With this team having playoff aspirations and making the playoffs a year ago, it does seem like the season is starting to very slowly unravel for this Raiders team, and if something isn't figured out soon, the Raiders could be one of those massively underperforming teams this year that has a lot of talent, right? Has Derek Carr, has Davante Adams, has Darren Waller, has Hunter Renfrow, has Max Crosby and Chandler Jones, but they just can't seem to figure it out. And right now, it seems to be coming down to some of the coaching staff and some of the coaching decisions made by this Vegas team. Of course, the big storyline coming out of this week is going to be whether Mike McDaniel can kind of break the mold of being the Belichick disciple that can't do it, right? There's been a lot of players, or a lot of coaches over the years, the Matt Patricias, the Brian Floreses, you name a Patriots disciple, they probably haven't worked out super well as head coaches in the NFL. And Mike McDaniel was really hoping to, kind of leave that legacy behind him, I guess, and kind of come out and be the first good head coach under the Bill Belichick coaching tree. But after starting off 2-0 and their playoffs hope kind of being slammed just 2 weeks into the season, it does seem like he may be falling into that lineup. Now, taking a look at the rest of the NFL, there are 6 teams that remain undefeated in the 2022 season. Those teams being the Buffalo Bills, who look to be the most dominant franchise in the NFL right now after blowing out the defending champs in Week 1 and only allowing 7 points to the Tennessee Titans, who last year, despite their 0-2 start, were the AFC's number 1 seed going into the playoffs. So in back-to-back weeks, the Buffalo Bills dominate the Super Bowl champs and the number 1 seeded AFC team from a year ago. The Miami Dolphins are off to a surprising 2-0 start, I would say, after downing the Baltimore Ravens and the New England Patriots early in their season. 2 very good, very competitive teams. Miami has not by any means blown out any of their opponents in the same way that Buffalo has been able to do so, but a 2-0 start is a 2-0 start. The Eagles, as of right now, look to be one of the favorites in the NFC after their 2-0 start, a big win on Monday Night Football versus the Minnesota Vikings last week, and then, of course, the major victory in Detroit in Week 1. Philadelphia looks to be one of the powerhouses in the NFC, if not the overall favorite in the NFC up to this point. The New York Giants starting off their season 2-0 versus big wins versus the Tennessee Titans and the Carolina Panthers. They are continuing their good season, riding on the back of Saquon Barkley. Daniel Jones hasn't had any egregious turnovers yet, no game-losing plays up to this point, and I think if they can just continue to play that brand of football, run the ball, play good defense, play mistake-free football, get your playmakers the ball in space, I think the Giants have a pretty solid roster in order to do that. Tampa Bay continues their dominance under the Tom Brady era. Right, they're 2-0 again. They started 2-0, I think, mostly the last couple of years. They are going to be a long-term playoff contender. As long as Tom Brady is there, Tampa Bay is going to be a powerhouse in the NFC. They are off to yet another 2-0 start and look to make their return to the playoffs. And Kansas City, after a huge win, a huge blowout over Arizona in Week 1, and a very contested, tight battle in Week 2, Kansas City are kings of the AFC West to this point. They are maybe not the most impressive AFC powerhouse at this point, but they are certainly up there. They are definitely right behind Buffalo as that number 2, maybe even 1B team in the AFC right now. Them and Buffalo, I think, are the teams to beat in the AFC. Miami looks good, and there are some other younger teams that look pretty good in the AFC, but Kansas City and Buffalo are the 2 teams right now that everybody has to be watching because those are the 2 best teams in the conference right now. Now looking at the 5 Now, taking a look at the 5 teams that remain winless on the season, the big surprise here is, of course, Cincinnati. Cincinnati is the Super Bowl runner-up from a season ago, coming off a 10-6 season with a huge playoff run at the end of their year. They put them in the Super Bowl, but eventually fell to the Los Angeles Rams. They have now fallen twice in 2 weeks with losses to both the Dallas Cowboys as well as the Pittsburgh Steelers, 2 teams that as of right now, aren't looking to make the playoffs, right? Pittsburgh, they're 1-1. They had a really good defensive showing versus Cincinnati 2 weeks ago with those 4 interceptions, and then they had another good defensive outing versus the New England Patriots a week ago. But they're not really looking like a playoff team at this point. The Cowboys without Dak Prescott are a team that the Bengals should have beaten pretty significantly, I would say. And they just haven't been able to find their rhythm. The offensive line hasn't really been helping out Joe Burrow in the way that a lot of people thought it would. The wide receivers just aren't making the same plays that they were a season ago. Joe Burrow doesn't really look like the same quarterback that he did a season ago. And the Bengals just kind of seem to have a little bit of an issue starting off their 2022 season. The Titans are another team that continue to struggle despite the fact that they were the number 1 seed in the AFC a year ago. After trading away A.J. Brown, after a injury-riddled year by Derrick Henry last year, after some offensive line reshufflings, the Tennessee Titans don't look like that good of a football team. Getting blown out by Buffalo this year and getting upset by the New York Giants in Week 1, the Tennessee Titans are off to a really slow start to their NFL season. And honestly, I don't know if it's going to get any better for the Tennessee Titans, as their schedule now consists of the Las Vegas Raiders, who, yes, are winless, but they do look to be very competitive in both of their games. The Indianapolis Colts, who at this point aren't super good, but they have the talent to be there, right? They have a couple of games here in the next couple of weeks that can help them get back on track. But they go on and they play Denver later on in the season. They play Kansas City. They play Green Bay. They play Philadelphia. They play Los Angeles, as in the Chargers. They play the Cowboys once Dak Prescott's back and healthy. They have a very tough schedule, and getting off to an 0-2 start, as I said, is almost a death sentence to your playoff capacity. And to this point, they don't look like the greatest football team. Now, the Las Vegas Raiders are a team that I think has been surprising in a bad way this season. They are off to an 0-2 start as well after losing their first game to the Chargers, who are an AFC powerhouse, and then losing their other game to the Cardinals, who I wouldn't say are maybe a powerhouse, but are certainly a playoff contender in the NFC. They now get to go to Tennessee to play another 0-2 team, both teams looking to get their first win on the season. Then they travel to Denver. Then they go to the Kansas City Chiefs. They play the Texans, the Saints. They play the Broncos again. They play the Chargers again. They play the Rams later on in the season. They play the Niners and the Chiefs twice. They have a really tough schedule ahead of them, and I know that they've played 2 very good teams early in the season, but I would argue they haven't even played the best teams on their schedule yet, and they're already off to an 0-2 start. Now, of course, it's never too late to turn their season around. It's never too late to, start rattling off some wins. And if they can go 2-2 to start the season, right, go 2-0 over the next 2 weeks, their season can get right back on track where it was at the very beginning. But they are off to a very slow and a very sloppy start to their season. Now, the Atlanta Falcons are another team that are off to an 0-2 start. This one a little bit more predictable, a little bit more of what we thought was going to happen. The Falcons, I think, are this year's Lions. They're a young football team. They have a bridge quarterback, funnily enough. They have a bridge quarterback who's kind of played with a couple different teams and can definitely win you football games, but probably isn't going to be the quarterback to elevate you to a lot of wins, of course, being Marcus Mariota. They are young. They are scrappy. They've kind of kept both games incredibly close, but with their lack of talent, they really haven't been able to pull off any major victories over either of their 2 opponents so far. As I said, I think they will be kind of the Detroit Lions of this year, that scrappy team that's always close, that, even if they're 0-6 by week 7, right, they're going to have 3-4 games that are 1 score. They're going to have a bunch of plays that it's like, oh, well, if they could have just made this one, if they could have just caught this interception, if they could have just hit this big play at the end of the game, if they could have just done this or that, they could have been a fairly average football team. But they are lacking talent in key positions. They're lacking experience in their coaching staff. And right now, they are struggling to find victories. And then Carolina is the final team to remain winless on the season. They just can't seem to get out of their own way. They had a ton of issues this offseason with the quarterbacking situation. They drafted and traded up to draft Matt Corral. They signed Sam Darnold. They have PJ Walker. They then traded for Baker Mayfield after trading up to draft the quarterback in Matt Corral from Ole Miss in the 3rd round. They had quarterback issues. They have issues pretty much everywhere that you can think of. They do have a couple defensive stars in, of course, Brian Burns and in Brian Burns as well as Jeremy Chin. But those two defensive stars are not enough to keep the Panthers afloat. And they are looking to be one of maybe the lesser teams in the NFL this year. And taking a look at the weekly stars before we wrap up the show today, we do have a few on offense and a few on defense. Starting off with the offensive side of the ball, Tyreek Hill was certainly a star this week. He had 11 receptions for 190 yards and 2 touchdowns. He and Tua were a major factor as to why the Baltimore Ravens were able. Him and Tua Tagovailoa were a huge reason why the Miami Dolphins were able to make a comeback in this game, why they were able to find their way back and work their way towards a victory. Another key component of that, Jalen Waddle, 11 receptions on the day for 117 yards and 2 touchdowns. Not nearly as efficient as Tyreek Hill, but did have, again, 11 receptions, 117 yards, and 2 touchdowns, was a major factor in that game and did catch the game-winning touchdown in Miami. Amon-Ra St. Brown for the Detroit Lions had 9 receptions, 116 yards, and 2 touchdowns, but had 2 carries for 68 yards as well. So he had a very efficient day on both the ground and through the air for Detroit, was one of the big reasons they were able to find their way in success against Washington. Aaron Jones had 15 rushing attempts for 132 yards and a rushing touchdown, while having 3 receptions for 38 yards and a touchdown on top of that in the Packers' blowover win versus the Chicago Bears. And then defensively, Aiden Hutchinson arrived in the NFL as the number 2 overall pick with 6 pressures, 3 sacks, and many more big plays off the stat sheet. Marcus Williams made his first big plays with the Baltimore Ravens this week with 10 tackles and 2 interceptions in a great efforted loss. And then Josh Allen of the Jacksonville Jaguars had 2 sacks and was the major leader on the defense that ended up having the lone shutout of the week. So, with all that being said, that is all we have for you guys today. That is the recap of Week 2 in the NFL's 2022 season, with all the stars, all the breakouts, all the records, and of course all the scores from around the league. Thank you all so very much for watching. We will be back next week with more recap, with more stars, more standouts, and of course, everything you need to know about Week 3 of the NFL season. But until then, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next week for the Week 3 recap.